I built this flood wall because I knew exactly what the hillside could do during a major storm. The HOA board laughed when they first saw it. They called it ugly, unnecessary, and a complete joke. They were still laughing when the rain started falling. Richard Collins, the HOA board's loudest critic, came out personally to inspect it. He walked along the wall with his clipboard and shook his head. He said it would never stop serious floodwater. I told him I hoped he would never have to find out. Richard told me the wall was ridiculous. He said the HOA had managed storms for decades without anything like it. I reminded him that this wasn't about appearances. It was about where the water would go when the ground could no longer absorb it. A few days later, an orange violation notice appeared on the wall. The HOA claimed the structure violated neighborhood appearance standards. They ordered me to remove it. I refused. I wasn't guessing when I built that wall. I had a professional drainage assessment done before construction. The report showed exactly where stormwater would naturally flow, and the HOA neighborhood sat directly in its path. Then the forecast changed. What had started as heavy rain became a serious mountain storm. Water began rushing down the slopes toward the neighborhood. And suddenly, the wall everyone mocked became the only thing standing between the homes and the runoff. Within minutes, the streets below began filling with water. The drainage channels were overflowing faster than anyone expected. Richard could see the water approaching the neighborhood, and for the first time, nobody was laughing at my wall. Richard stood in the middle of the flooding and finally understood. The water wasn't stopping because of the HOA's plans. It was being redirected by the very drainage system they had ignored. Then their office building started taking on water. The HOA office was suddenly surrounded by water. Their parking lot disappeared beneath the muddy runoff. Richard kept looking back toward my property. Now he understood why I had built the wall. My wall held exactly as the engineers predicted. The water moved along the drainage route instead of rushing toward my home. Across the neighborhood, the HOA finally stopped calling it a joke. Now, they were wondering why they had ever ordered me to remove it. The HOA parking lot disappeared under muddy water within minutes. Cars were surrounded, storm drains were overwhelmed, and everyone was scrambling for higher ground. Richard kept staring toward my wall. That was when his joke stopped being funny. The officers started asking Richard what had happened. He blamed the storm, the drainage system, and even my wall. One officer simply asked him why my property was still above the floodwater. Richard didn't have an answer. Richard pointed straight at my wall. He told the officers that structure was a problem. But the officers could see what was happening with their own eyes. My property was protected, while the lower neighborhood was underwater. I showed them the engineering report I had kept from day one. It explained the drainage path, the elevation changes, and the purpose of the wall. Everything happening outside had been predicted in that report. The HOA had simply chosen not to listen. One officer asked Richard a very simple question. Did your association actually order him to remove this wall? Richard hesitated. Then he admitted that they had. The officers looked at the violation notice again. They compared it with the engineering report and the current flood conditions. Nothing about the wall looked like a joke anymore. It looked like exactly what it had been designed to be. With the neighborhood flooding, the HOA called an emergency meeting. This time, nobody was discussing the wall's appearance. They were discussing how much damage could have been prevented, and my engineering report was sitting right in front of them. The map made the situation painfully clear. Water naturally traveled from the higher hillside toward the HOA neighborhood. My wall had redirected that flow toward the proper drainage channel. Removing it would have made the flooding risk worse. Later that evening, Richard came to my door alone. There was no clipboard raised in anger this time. There was no violation notice. He had come because the HOA finally needed my help. Richard finally said the words I never expected to hear. We need that wall. The same HOA that ordered me to remove it now wanted it protected. And I realized their biggest mistake was about to become my biggest advantage.